One missile battery. Positioned, hidden, relocated 3 times, shielding everything from Sevastopol to the Kerch Strait. Ukraine spent months hunting it. And when the window finally opened, they had 18 minutes to act. This is the story of how Ukrainian precision targeting took apart the crown jewel of Crimea's air defense network. Not with overwhelming force, not with an armada. With intelligence, timing, and a strike sequence that Russian air defense doctrine never saw coming. I'm your host at EastAlert, where we analyze the battles that change wars. The S-400 Triumph, sitting somewhere in the peninsula's northern sector, wasn't just another missile battery. It was the cornerstone of a layered air defense architecture that had made Russian aviation in Crimea feel untouchable. Long-range surveillance radar sweeping 600 kilometers in every direction. 4 launcher vehicles, each carrying 4 ready-to-fire 4.8N 6E3 missiles. Engagement ceiling reaching 27 kilometers. Maximum intercept range stretching to 250 kilometers under optimal conditions. For months, that battery was the reason Ukrainian aircraft and long-range strike drones couldn't operate freely across the peninsula. Every storm shadow trajectory calculated, every ATACMS flight path modeled. They all bent around the S-400's engagement envelope like water around stone. Russian commanders understood the battery's strategic value. They understood it so well that they'd relocated it 3 separate times over the preceding operational cycle. Each move executed under satellite blackout windows, each new position camouflaged within hours of arrival. They were playing a chess game of survival, betting that constant movement would defeat Ukrainian targeting. For a long time, they were right. 3 moves. 3 positions. 3 times Ukrainian targeting cells watched satellite imagery and found nothing but netting and empty ground. But the 4th position was different, because the 4th position came with a constraint that the Russian logistics chain couldn't solve: maintenance. The S-400's 91N6E Big Bird engagement radar, the system's eyes and brain, requires periodic calibration cycles that cannot be performed while the system is in its rapid deployment travel configuration. The radar array must be elevated, the cables connected, the cooling systems running. For approximately 4 hours during each major calibration sequence, the battery's signature blows up across every spectrum that satellites and SIGINT aircraft monitor. Heat. Electromagnetic emissions, radar output. Ukrainian intelligence had been mapping those calibration windows for 11 weeks. The battery's maintenance schedule was reconstructed through sources that EastAlert can now piece together from available open-source intelligence. Ukrainian electronic warfare aircraft operating from safe distances had been collecting the battery's emission signatures. Each calibration produced a distinctive pattern: timing, frequency range, duration. The pattern established a rhythm, and rhythms can be predicted. Satellite imagery confirmed the battery's approximate location to a 400-meter probability ellipse. Not precise enough for a strike, but precise enough to cue the next collection phase. 3 HIMARS sources operating in Crimea provided the refinement. Ukrainian intelligence officers won't confirm the specifics, and EastAlert isn't going to speculate about individuals. What Ukrainian General Staff reports confirmed afterward was that targeting coordinates were refined to within 15 meters of the battery's actual position before the strike window was declared open. 15 meters. In modern precision warfare, that's the difference between a near miss and a catastrophic kill. The planning cell working this target had been at it for weeks. Not because the targeting was complicated. By the time HUMINT confirmation arrived, the firing solution was straightforward. The difficulty was the timing constraint. The calibration window lasted 4 hours. The battery was positioned behind 3 overlapping Russian point defense systems, a Pantsir S-1 tracked anti-aircraft gun missile system approximately 3. 2 kilometers to the northwest, a second Pantsir positioned 4, 7 kilometers to the east, and a Tor M2 battery 6, 1 kilometers to the south. Any approaching missile or drone had to survive all 3 engagement zones before reaching the S-400. Ukrainian planners looked at that defensive arrangement and designed something elegant: multi-axis, multi-altitude, multi-timing. Which weapon was deadlier in this operation? A. HIMARS precision rockets. B. Storm Shadow cruise missiles. C. Neptune anti-radiation decoys. Comment below with your answer. The tactical breakdown at the end of this video will explain exactly why the answer surprised Russian air defense commanders. The strike package assembled over several nights of darkness, not in one location. Dispersed across multiple launch sites to prevent Russian counter-battery intelligence from reconstructing the attack vector before it launched. Two Ukrainian Air Force Su-24M strike aircraft had been modified to carry British-supplied Storm Shadow cruise missiles. Each aircraft would carry 2 missiles. 4 Storm Shadows total. Each one a 1-meter precision weapon carrying a 450-kilogram Bro-H dual-stage warhead designed to penetrate hardened targets through sequential explosion. First stage punches through outer structure. Second stage detonates inside. The S-400's radar van and command post trailer aren't hardened to Bro-H penetration standards. They never were. But Storm Shadows have a problem at ranges over 250 kilometers. They fly slowly enough that Russian radar systems can detect them. The approach path from Ukrainian-controlled territory to the Crimean target required a flight profile that would put the missiles inside Pantsir S-1 engagement range for approximately 90 seconds, long enough for an alert crew to engage. That's where the second element entered the picture. Ukrainian GUR Special Operations had quietly moved 2 mobile HIMARS launch vehicles to firing positions near the administrative boundary line. Each HIMARS carried a pod of 6 M31 guided rockets. Not ATACMS, M31 GMLRS rockets, with a 70-kilometer range and GPS-guided warheads accurate to within 2 meters. The M31S were pre-programmed with coordinates for the Pantsir S-1 battery to the northwest. The Pantsir S-1 has one significant vulnerability. Its 1RS-2 tracking radar operates in a different frequency band than the S-400's 91N6E engagement radar. When the Pantsir crew is actively tracking and engaging incoming rockets, the system's full processing load goes to the current engagement. Reaction time to a second incoming threat axis drops significantly. Ukrainian planners were going to create a processing overload. Stay with me. What happens in the next 18 minutes of this strike sequence dismantles an entire Russian air defense network through timing and deception that Russian doctrine simply hadn't modeled. The calibration window opened in the early morning hours, before first light. Russian maintenance crews began the sequence as scheduled. The 91N6E radar elevated to its operational position. Cooling fans activated. The electromagnetic signature spiked exactly as Ukrainian SIGINT aircraft had been predicting. 40 kilometers away, a Ukrainian intelligence officer monitoring signals confirmed the timing. The message went out. Go. But here's where everything nearly collapsed. One of the 2 Su-24M aircraft reported a partial systems fault in the left engine feed line 15 minutes before planned launch. Not a catastrophic failure. But the aircraft commander wasn't willing to fly a combat sortie over maximum range enemy air defense with a degraded fuel system. Standard call. Correct call. The strike had been planned around 4 Storm Shadow impacts arriving within a 12-second window. Reducing to 2 missiles from 1 aircraft changed the math on defeating the S-400's point defense screen. 1 aircraft launching 2 missiles. The battery's own close-in defensive systems, if they survived the HIMARS suppression, had time to engage both missiles sequentially. The planning cell had 6 minutes to recalculate. What they came up with in those 6 minutes became, according to Ukrainian General Staff reporting, a key tactical innovation that changed how subsequent strikes were planned. The single Su-24M would launch its 2 Storm Shadows. Simultaneously, 2 Ukrainian TB-2 Bayraktar unmanned aircraft would approach the target from the eastern sector at low altitude. Not carrying strike munitions, but equipped with Wescam MX-15D electro-optical pods transmitting targeting imagery in real time. The TB-2S would arrive at the target approximately 45 seconds after the Storm Shadow impacts, confirm damage, and if necessary provide targeting data for a follow-on HIMARS strike against any surviving radar components. More critically, the TB-2S approaching from the east would appear on Russian radar as strike assets. The Tor M2 battery to the south would have to allocate tracking channels to assess the TB-2 threat, creating exactly the processing overload originally planned with 4 Storm Shadows. Improvised. Effective. The HIMARS launch came first. At 3:17 a.m., both vehicles released their full pods within seconds of each other. 12 M31 rockets in the air simultaneously, all targeting the Pantsir S-1 northwest of the S-400. At 70 kilometers range, the rocket's flight time was approximately 90 seconds. 90 seconds is a long time to wait. Russian radar operators at the Pantsir S-1 detected the incoming rockets at approximately 45 seconds before impact. Standard reaction time for an alert crew. The Pantsir's 1RS-2 radar locked the incoming rockets. The crew began engagement sequencing. The rockets were coming in on a tight cluster. 12 weapons aimed at a space no larger than 40 meters across. The Pantsir S-1 carries 12 57E6 surface-to-air missiles in ready configuration. Even with perfect engagement rates, attempting to intercept 12 closely spaced incoming rockets in 45 seconds pushes the system to its operational limits. The Pantsir crew did what trained crews do. They engaged. Interceptor missiles launched. The crew's full attention, the system's full processing capacity, directed north-northwest at the incoming HIMARS salvo. At 3:18 a.m. and 40 seconds, the Su-24M launched its 2 Storm Shadows from a release point 280 kilometers northwest of the target. The missiles dropped from the aircraft at 900 meters altitude, motors ignited, guidance systems initialized, and began their low-altitude terrain-following approach at 1,000 kilometers per hour. How many vehicles and systems did Ukraine destroy or damage in this strike? A-4 systems. B-7 systems? C-11 systems? The answer comes at the end, with an explanation of why the number was so different from what Ukrainian planners initially targeted. The TB2S entered the eastern approach corridor at 3:19 a.m., flying at 120 meters altitude. The Tor M2 battery's radar immediately acquired them. The Tor M2 was designed to engage low-flying targets, precisely the profile the TB2S presented. Russian doctrine for the Tor M2 is clear. Engage and destroy approaching air threats before they reach the defended asset. The Tor M2 crew did their job. They began tracking, they evaluated threat priority, they allocated intercept channels. They were looking east when the Storm Shadows came from the northwest. Subscribe to EastAlert if you want to understand how modern warfare actually works, because this is the kind of combined arms deception that military academies are already studying. The Storm Shadow flight profile to the target area used terrain masking for most of its approach, hugging the northern Crimean flatlands at altitudes under 50 meters. Only in the final 30 kilometers did the missile climb briefly to acquire its programmed target coordinates before diving into its terminal attack profile. At 3:23 a.m. and 12 seconds, the first Storm Shadow impacted the S-400's command post vehicle. The Bro-H warhead performed exactly as designed. First stage penetration. Pause. Second stage detonation inside the vehicle's electronic compartment. The command post, containing the battle management computers, data link systems, and crew positions for the battery commander and 3 operators, was gone in approximately 80 milliseconds. The second Storm Shadow, 3 seconds behind the first, impacted the 91N6E Big Bird radar vehicle at its base, where the rotating radar dish connects to the drive mechanism and primary power systems. The explosion didn't just damage the radar, it separated the upper radar assembly from the vehicle body and sent it approximately 12 meters sideways. An S-400 battery without its engagement radar is a collection of expensive metal. Blind. Unable to engage. In the 90 seconds that followed, the TB2S in the eastern approach corridor banked left, climbing to observation altitude, and began transmitting damage imagery back to the Ukrainian strike coordination cell. Analysts processed the camera feeds in real time. The command post vehicle was destroyed. The Big Bird radar was destroyed. 3 of the 4 launcher vehicles were visible in imagery, apparently intact, still carrying their 48N6E3 missiles. The 4th launcher was partially obscured by smoke. The TB2 operators, working from their imagery, identified that the surviving launchers represented a material threat even without the command post. Russian mobile units sometimes carry backup command hardware that allows emergency autonomous operation. The targeting data was passed to the HIMARS crews, who were already reloaded with a second pod of 6 M31 rockets. At 3:31 a.m., the second HIMARS salvo launched. 6 rockets targeted across the 3 visible launcher vehicles, not aimed at destroying the launchers outright. The HIMARS M31 warhead is optimized for area suppression, not precision vehicle kills. The goal was to make the launcher area operationally untenable, destroying any backup command equipment, killing any crew members attempting to restore system function, and ensuring the missiles on the launchers couldn't be remotely activated. If you believe tactics win wars, type EastAlert in the comments. Because what Ukraine just executed wasn't improvised scrambling. It was doctrinal innovation in real time. 4 of the 6 rockets impacted within the launcher vehicle cluster. 1 launcher received a near-direct hit from a rocket that detonated within 3 meters. Satellite imagery showed the vehicle subsequently burning, its 48N6E3 missiles cooking off in secondary explosions over the following 11 minutes. Combat footage captured by the TB2S recorded the cook-off sequence. The missiles, still in their launch canisters, burning rather than detonating, their solid fuel propellant igniting and producing dense black smoke columns visible from 40 kilometers. The Panzer S-1 to the northwest. The crew that had been frantically engaging the HIMARS M31 salvo intercepted 8 of the 12 incoming rockets. 4 got through. 4 M31 warheads impacting a Panzer S-1 vehicle. The system was destroyed. Satellite imagery confirmed the vehicle as a total loss. But here's the layer that OSINT analysts didn't immediately catch in the initial strike footage, and the layer that makes this operation significant beyond the hardware destroyed. The Russian air defense network in Crimea doesn't operate as isolated batteries. It operates as an integrated system, with data links connecting each battery to a regional command node. When the S-400's Big Bird radar went offline at 3:23 a.m., a gap opened in the coverage architecture. Not a small gap. A 250-kilometer radius sphere of previously protected airspace suddenly had no overlapping long-range coverage. Ukrainian Air Force Command recognized that gap within minutes. What would NATO have done differently with that radar gap and an open sky over Crimea? Comment your tactical analysis below. We want to hear your thinking on how this window should have been used. The window lasted approximately 4 hours before Russian forces completed emergency redeployment of a replacement long-range radar system to partially restore coverage. 4 hours is an eternity in modern military aviation. Ukrainian General Staff reporting, corroborated by satellite imagery analysis and combat footage verification, documented what moved through that window. The specifics of follow-on operations remain largely classified. What the open-source record shows is that Ukrainian unmanned aerial vehicles operating over the peninsula's northern sector recorded imagery and signals intelligence that had been impossible to collect while the S-400 was operational. Targets were mapped. Data was compiled. The long-range radar gap allowed collection assets to operate where they'd previously been denied. That intelligence collection had operational value extending far beyond the night of the strike. The imagery and signals data gathered during those 4 hours fed targeting processes for subsequent Ukrainian operations. This is the compounding logic of precision warfare. You don't just destroy a target, you create conditions. You open windows. You collect intelligence that the destroyed system was designed to prevent you from collecting. The S-400's destruction was the first move in a longer sequence. Russian commanders understood this immediately. Intercepted communications, analyzed by Ukrainian intelligence and shared in fragments with Western partners, indicated significant alarm at command echelons above the regimental level. The battery commander's call to his superiors in the immediate aftermath has been characterized by Ukrainian intelligence sources as describing complete operational failure. The battery was gone. The maintenance window that Russian logistics had considered a protected administrative event had become a targeting vulnerability. The Russian response in the hours following the strike illustrated the systemic problems that have plagued Russian air defense coordination throughout the conflict. A replacement Panzer S-1 vehicle was rushed forward to establish emergency point defense around the surviving S-400 launcher vehicles. But the launcher vehicles themselves, without their command post and without their engagement radar, were inoperable. Positioning a Panzer next to 3 inoperable launcher vehicles meant pulling point defense away from other assets. Russian command doctrine under pressure tends toward concentration rather than distribution. When something important is threatened, reinforce it. When a battery is destroyed, rush assets to the site. The logic is understandable. The problem is that it creates predictability. Ukrainian intelligence assets monitored the emergency movements and updated targeting databases accordingly. Drone operators working Ukrainian General Staff targeting cells described the aftermath this way in a post-operation briefing fragment released through official channels. The destruction of the S-400 didn't end the operation. It began the next phase. Every Russian asset that moved to respond to the strike became a new targeting datum. Now look at the broader picture. What did the strike actually accomplish? The immediate material accounting, compiled from satellite imagery analysis, combat footage verification, and Ukrainian General Staff reporting, established the following battle damage assessment. The S-400 battery's command post vehicle, destroyed. The 91N6E Big Bird engagement radar, destroyed. 1 launcher vehicle, destroyed by direct hit and subsequent missile cook-off. 3 launcher vehicles, damaged to varying degrees, none operable. The Panzer S-1 battery covering the northwestern approach, destroyed by HIMARS M31 impacts. 4 of 12 M31 rockets in the first salvo were shot down by the Panzer before its destruction. 8 penetrated. Secondary assessment. The Tor M2 battery to the south. After the TB2S conducting the Eastern Deception maneuver were engaged, both unmanned aircraft returned to Ukrainian-controlled airspace safely. The Tor M2 crew had expended 9 of their ready-rack missiles attempting to engage the TB2S, a valid response given their orders, but one that left the battery in reduced readiness for the hours following the strike. Total estimated replacement value of destroyed Russian systems. Ukrainian official sources estimate approximately $850 million in hardware. The figure includes the S-400 battery components, the Pantsir S-1, and associated support vehicles. Independent analysis by Western defense economists puts the replacement cost somewhat lower, at approximately $600 to $700 million, accounting for the fact that Russia produces these systems domestically at costs below export pricing. The human cost within the Russian crews. Ukrainian General Staff estimated 23 Russian military personnel killed and a further 14 wounded based on crew complement standards for the destroyed systems. These figures are estimates. Direct confirmation from Russian official sources is unavailable, as Russia does not acknowledge personnel losses in specific equipment loss incidents. What would the operation have looked like if Russia had positioned the S-400 differently? What if the maintenance window had occurred at a different time? Or if the battery's crew had been faster to react? These aren't hypothetical questions. They're the questions Russian air defense commanders were asking in the days following the strike, based on pattern analysis of subsequent Russian force deployments and doctrinal adjustments. The most significant Russian tactical response was also the most obvious. Accelerate the pace of battery relocations, reduce the interval between moves, accept the operational burden of more frequent position changes to prevent targeting windows from opening. The problem with this response is that more frequent moves mean more frequent maintenance cycles. More maintenance cycles mean more calibration windows. The solution creates more of the vulnerability it's trying to eliminate. Ukrainian targeting cells, fully aware of this dynamic, were already modeling the implications. The S-400's destruction didn't just remove one battery from the order of battle. It pushed Russian commanders into a higher operational tempo that degrades equipment lifespan and reliability faster, creates more targeting opportunities, and taxes Russian logistics chains that were already under severe strain. The other Russian response, visible in satellite imagery and OSINT analysis in the weeks following the strike, was to position point defense systems more aggressively around remaining long-range batteries. More Pantsir S-1 vehicles per S-400 battery, tighter integration, shorter response arcs. The problem is resource allocation. Russia has a finite number of Pantsir systems. Concentrating them around long-range batteries means pulling them away from other defended assets, airfields, logistics, nodes, ammunition depots. Ukraine noticed. Ukrainian strike planners noticed. The intelligence picture that emerged from monitoring Russian asset repositioning after the S-400 strike revealed exposed flanks that hadn't existed before. Assets that had been covered by the Pantsir vehicles now surrounding the surviving S-400 batteries were suddenly without their mobile point defense. The S-400 strike created a force redistribution cascade that opened new targeting opportunities across the peninsula. Real tactics. Real consequences. EastAlert. The lesson this operation demonstrated for Russian doctrine is one that analysts at both NATO and Russian General Staff have recognized. Static or semi-static air defense systems in a modern contested environment are targets, not shields. The longer a system stays in one location, or the more predictable its operational cycle becomes, the more precisely it can be targeted. The S-400 Triumph was designed to defend against exactly the kind of strike Ukraine executed: cruise missiles, precision rockets, multi-axis approach. In test environments and doctrinal scenarios, the S-400 performs impressively against all of those threats. The battery destroyed in Crimea wasn't defeated by a weapon the S-400 couldn't theoretically handle. It was defeated by intelligence work, timing, and deception that turned the battery's own maintenance requirements into a targeting vulnerability. This is the asymmetric logic of the war in its current phase. Ukraine doesn't match Russia's air defense in quantity. Ukraine can't. Russia fields dozens of S-300 and S-400 batteries, Pantsir vehicles in the hundreds, Tor M2 systems deployed across the full depth of their occupied territory. Ukrainian manufacturing and international supply cannot match that inventory in direct competition. What Ukraine can do, what this operation demonstrated, is identify the specific vulnerabilities in specific systems at specific moments and apply precision exactly where the gaps are. One strike, one battery, one irreplaceable long-range radar gone. The intellectual work behind the strike, the 11 weeks of calibration window mapping, the HUMINT coordination to refine target coordinates, the improvised replanning with 6 minutes available, the decision to use TB2S as radar deception assets instead of strike platforms. That work doesn't appear in the damage assessment, but it's the actual weapon that won the engagement. Ukraine doesn't just use weapons. Ukraine invents new ways to fight. And here's a detail that deserves more attention than it's received. The TB2 Bayraktar aircraft used in the Eastern deception role were, from a Russian radar operator's perspective, legitimate threats requiring engagement. The Tor M2 crew that allocated tracking channels and fired missiles against those TB2S made a tactically correct decision under their rules of engagement. They shot down real Ukrainian unmanned aircraft. They also burned through 9 ready-rack missiles doing it. The TB2S were deliberately sacrificed as operational pawns to trigger the Tor M2's ammunition expenditure at the moment when it mattered most. The cost of 2 TB2 aircraft, roughly $5 million combined, triggered the expenditure of 9 Tor M2 missiles and prevented the Tor system from engaging the storm shadows during the critical terminal phase. 9 Tor M29 M331 missiles cost approximately $6 million. The 2 TB2S cost approximately $5 million. Ukraine paid a modest premium to neutralize the Tor M2's intervention capacity. But the TB2S also generated the real-time battle damage assessment imagery that guided the HIMARS follow-on strike. The drone cameras over the target during and after the storm shadow impacts meant the planning cell had confirmation within minutes, not hours, of what the missiles had actually hit and what remained to be targeted. That immediate battle damage assessment capability accelerated the follow-on targeting cycle dramatically. This is the operational logic of integrated unmanned systems. They're not just strike platforms. They're persistent eyes that allow ground-based fires to be retargeted in near real time against surviving elements. Russian air defense doctrine has historically assumed that destroying the unmanned aircraft ends the threat. This operation showed that assumption failing. The TB2S completed their mission by being shot down, because the mission wasn't to survive. The mission was to make the Tor M2 battery shoot at something other than the storm shadows. For anyone watching this and thinking about how these dynamics apply to their understanding of modern warfare, the single most important lesson isn't about any specific weapon system. It's about the targeting cycle, the 11-week collection effort, the HUMINT refinement, the calibration window analysis, the improvised replanning with 6 minutes available. The decision to sacrifice expensive unmanned aircraft as deception pawns? Everything that mattered about this operation happened before the missiles launched. Will Russia develop better countermeasures against this kind of maintenance window targeting in the months ahead? Comment why yes or no, because the answer to that question determines whether this type of operation remains viable for Ukraine's long-range strike program. Now, for the answer to the quiz question posed earlier in this video, how many vehicles and systems did Ukraine destroy or damage? The answer is B7 systems. Not 4, not 11. 7. The command post vehicle, the 91N6E radar vehicle, 1 launcher vehicle destroyed, 3 launcher vehicles damaged, and the Pantsir S-1 battery covering the northwestern approach. Why not more? Because the Tor M2 battery to the south was not destroyed. It expended ammunition against the TB2 decoys and suffered no structural damage. Its crews survived. The battery, after emergency resupply, returned to operational status within days. And why not 4? Because Ukrainian planners initially estimated they might only destroy the radar and command post before the Pantsir point defense screen stopped further missiles. The HIMARS follow-on against the launcher cluster, enabled by TB2 battle damage assessment imagery, was an opportunity that materialized because the improvised plan worked better than the original design. 7 systems is a better outcome than the original plan projected. The improvisation, forced by a mechanical fault on 1 aircraft, produced a more comprehensive strike result than the original 4-storm shadow design would likely have achieved. That's worth sitting with for a moment. The equipment fault that threatened to collapse the operation ultimately forced a tactical innovation that made the strike more effective. The planning cell's 6-minute replanning session produced a better solution under pressure than the original team had developed over weeks of deliberate planning. This happens in combat more often than doctrine acknowledges. The prepared mind encounters the unexpected problem and finds the better answer precisely because the pressure strips away attachment to the original plan. Was it the right call to proceed with the strike when the second aircraft went unserviceable? That's the first question worth discussing. The window was limited. The calibration cycle wouldn't recur for days or weeks. Waiting meant accepting the window closing. Proceeding with half the planned Storm Shadow payload meant accepting higher risk of incomplete target destruction. The planning cell's decision to proceed and improvise was aggressive. Given the result, it was vindicated. But the other outcome, proceeding with reduced capability and failing to destroy the primary target while burning 11 weeks of collected intelligence, was a real possibility. Could Russian air defense commanders have prevented this? Honestly, yes, with different doctrine. A maintenance schedule that didn't concentrate the battery's full electromagnetic signature in a predictable cycle would have denied Ukrainian intelligence the targeting pattern that made the strike possible. The vulnerability wasn't in the S-400's hardware. It was in the operational security around a routine administrative procedure. Maintenance windows should have been staggered, conducted with radar, camouflage active, timed randomly rather than on predictable intervals. These aren't classified insights. They're air defense, operational security basics. The fact that the battery was operating on a predictable maintenance cycle suggests either that commanders didn't correctly assess the targeting threat or that logistics and technical constraints made randomization impossible. Either explanation is damning. And what would you have done in command of the Ukrainian planning cell when that second aircraft reported the fuel system fault with 6 minutes to launch? Stand down and lose the window? Launch with reduced payload and accept the risk? Or, as Ukrainian commanders actually decided, adapt. Use what you have. Comment your tactical analysis below. The conversation in the comments of EastAlert videos consistently produces analysis that matches what professional military observers are publishing. We read every one. The S-400 battery is gone. The Big Bird radar that watched 600 kilometers of airspace in every direction is gone. The Pantsir S-1 crew that might have stopped the storm shadows is gone. The window that opened over Crimea, briefly, in the hours after the strike, gave Ukrainian intelligence assets access they hadn't had in months. Russian logistics are already working to replace what was lost. A system as expensive and scarce as the S-400 isn't replaced quickly. The production pipeline, constrained by international sanctions and the demands of a multi-front air defense network, cannot absorb losses of this magnitude at speed. Intelligence reporting from Western partners suggests Russian air defense units in the theater are already operating at reduced readiness compared to pre-strike baselines. Subscribe to EastAlert, because we break down the battles that textbooks will study for decades. Not just the explosions, not just the hardware. The 11 weeks of intelligence work that made the explosion possible. The 6-minute replanning session. The decision to sacrifice 2 TB2S as radar deception pawns. The peninsula is quieter now than it was before the strike. But the debris field where the S-400 battery stood tells a story that silence can't erase. Twisted launcher rails. A radar dish separated from its vehicle, half buried in the ground 30 meters from where it mounted. Blackened earth where 948N6E3 missiles cooked off in their canisters. Modern warfare doesn't announce its turning points in advance. They look like one battery, one maintenance window, one planning cell making the right call under 6 minutes of pressure. The turning point is only visible afterward, when analysts map what the S-400 was protecting and realize how much changed when it was gone. Real battles, real tactics, real consequences. EastAlert. The sky over Crimea opened, briefly, in the early morning hours after that strike. 4 hours. Intelligence assets moved through the gap. Data was collected that couldn't be collected before. And somewhere in that data, in the imagery and signals gathered during those 4 hours of uncontested access, were the coordinates and patterns that shaped what came next. The wrecks remain. The gap in Russian air defense coverage has been partially restored. But the intelligence picture that Ukrainian targeting cells built during those 4 hours is permanent. You can replace a radar. You cannot uncollect the intelligence its absence allowed. Stay vigilant.